Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. A few of you have been asking for a blue jay tutorial, so for this video I'll be sharing my process for painting this winter blue jay using just 4 paint colors. I'll be sure to include a list in the description below with all my supplies, so grab your paints and let's get started. For our little blue jay today, I'm going to be using 4 different paint colors. I have Holbein Cobalt Blue Hue, I also have Engram Manganese Blue Hue, Daniel Smith Lamp Black, and Holbein Raw Umber. I have 2 brushes by Silver Black Velvet, size 2 and 8 round brushes, a jar of water, and I'm going to start with the wet and wet technique. So I'm using my larger size 8 round brush and just painting in the broader sections that I see on the bird using clean water. I'm pushing the water into the paper to encourage it to absorb. And then I'm going to start with a nice bluish gray, mixing a little bit of lamp black and my manganese blue hue. And I'm painting in the belly, this nice light gray color, and just allowing that paint to spread out. I'm also using that on the cheek of the bird. Now I'm starting with my cobalt blue hue, and this is a beautiful bright blue. I'm using really intense pigment here in the center. And just because we use the wet and wet technique, the paint is blooming and exploding on the paper, and it's creating this wonderful soft fuzzy effect, just like the downy feathers you would see on a bird. So where there's a lighter value, of course, I'm adding a little bit more water into the mixture so that it's a little lighter. And then I'm adding little pops of black, introducing that black stripe underneath the chin of the bird, delicately painting just with the tip of my round brush and encouraging that paint to continue flowing and bleeding out to create that soft, furry effect. I'm using kind of a combination of the blue that's on my brush and the black to start painting the details in these feathers. And then using that same watered down mixture, I'm darkening up the belly and adding some light blue shadows around the eyes where the feathers are white. On the crest of the head, I'm using my cobalt blue hue and painting various values, darker where I see shadow shapes and lighter towards the top. Always be controlling how much water's on your brush by dabbing or blotting on a paper towel. For the feathers, I'm using my cobalt blue hue for the darker areas. It's a slightly warmer blue than the manganese blue hue. If you want your feathers to look very realistic, be sure to carefully paint around the areas that are white, such as some of the tips of the wings. Some of the tips of the feathers have these nice little white lines on them, and there are areas that you definitely want to avoid. For a cooler blue, I'm using my manganese blue hue and painting this in on the wing, and you can see it's a slightly more cool blue. It's got a little bit more green in it, if you will. And then I'm using black to paint some of those tips of the feathers, again carefully painting or negative painting around those white strips that you see on the tips of the feathers. Fill in each feather using a delicate touch with your brush, and just paint with a little bit more pigment on your brush in the darker areas. I'm adding a very, very light watered down blue in between each of those white feathers, and then carefully painting in the tail using my cooler blue, my manganese blue. You also see different values in the tail feathers as well. It's not just one solid color. You can see towards the bottom of those tail feathers, it's a little darker. So I'm throwing in some cobalt blue hue and just darkening at the tips and pulling the paint up and encouraging it to blend while it's all wet and wet. Slowing way down for these tips of the feathers, the black tips of feathers underneath the wings. Before we go to the next part of the video, I just want to let you guys know that this tutorial is available in real time. Just head over to emilyolsonart.com where you can access all of my fully narrated real-time tutorials for just a small amount per month. I also include a sketch and reference photo with those tutorials, as well as a list of all the supplies I use so that you can follow the exact steps to paint along with me. With the Fearless Artist membership, you have access to my Watercolor Jumpstart video course, which is the perfect place to start if you're brand new to watercolor. There's also a series of 20-minute tutorials that will help sharpen your skills and give you delightful, frame-worthy little wins in your watercolor journey. And join our private Facebook group where you can share all of your amazing artwork and get feedback from other artists. I'll leave a link in the description below where you can see all the tutorials that are currently available, and I'm adding more every month. All right, let's get back to the video. And just adding delicate little details using the tip of my round brush. I'm using my black to paint in between the feathers and to help separate them. And for the top portion of the wing, I'm carefully painting around a couple of white details and just doing a flat wash with watered down manganese blue. And then filling in the details in between with black. You'll see I've switched to my smaller brush now. I'm using the size 2 Silver Black Velvet round brush for these little black details. You'll want to save the black stripes on the Blue Jay as a finishing detail. Save this for last. So now I'm painting in those little black stripes along the feathers, working slowly and carefully and adding all these details. Coming back to the head, if you end up with little sections where maybe some backwash happened or you ended up with an ugly edge, you can always scrub that out using a clean, damp brush. I'm adding some really light gray feather details to the head and starting to outline the eye using a combination of blue and gray. And then I'm filling in the eye completely with lamp black except for one little highlight. And this really helps give the bird a lifelike look. Make sure to use a lighter value with your black for things like shadows within the white. I'm using my lamp black for the beak, just carefully outlining the top, the center, and the bottom, and then allowing a couple of highlights to be left white where the paper is showing through in the center of the beak. Just darkening up the head and adding a couple more details with the tip of that size 2 round brush. If you want your painting to look really realistic, you'll want to add shadows, especially where you see areas that are white. They're not going to be completely white. There are going to be some shadows if you have a light source in the image. And here I'm carefully adding another layer across this one feather that was just a little too light and adding a couple of little black stripes into the feathers. Work really slowly. Make sure you can rest your hand on something if you're doing these really tiny details. So I'm just adding some more black above these white feathers here and doing those horizontal stripes as they cross those lighter blue feathers. It's important to have a good sketch here so that you can see more accurately where those stripes need to go. And then for these stripes within the feathers, use a really delicate, light touch as you pull your brush across the surface of the paper and try to complete each long line in one swooping motion of the brush. Here I'm filling in the stripes on the tail feathers, still using my lamp black. Some of the ones at the bottom are a little bit broader, so be sure to defer to your reference photo to make sure that you're creating the correct widths of each stripe. For the feet, I'm starting with a flat wash of watered down lamp black, so it's just a nice mid-tone gray. And filling it in almost completely, I'm just leaving a couple of little highlights here and there. Since the feet are not the focal point, I'm not going to be going into great detail on these. Now I'm just adding a second layer once that first layer is dry of more of a pure lamp black here. And you'll see I painted around a couple of those little feathers that are overlapping the black legs. And just darkening up, adding some details with those little claws, and allowing some of the gray to show through, giving it some dimension and detail. Now for the tree, I'm using my raw umber by Holbein, mixing in a tiny bit of black to neutralize that a little bit, and then adding a broad wash to the left side of the trunk, and then using more horizontal brush strokes as I pull that paint across to the right side of the tree trunk. I'm working really loosely here. While that's still wet, I drop in some lamp black on the left side and allow it to blend and bleed out, and then add a couple little horizontal black brush strokes indicating the texture of the bark, and then some more pigmented raw umber just to give it a more yellowish look. All of this is while that paint is still wet, so it blends out really nicely. I'm leaving the top white to indicate almost snow or the white wood that the bird is sitting on. Now to mix up my green, I used raw umber and manganese blue and mixed those together to produce this nice earthy green for the background. And I'm mixing it up with a little bit more pure raw umber just to add some pops of brilliant color to the background. But you'll see I'm painting really loosely with broad, quick brush strokes. And there's our finished Blue Jay. Hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.